not unfinished business any longer. South Carolina has captured its second national championship. Tears of triumph in 2022.
They look back that they like to run. And now Wilson. They've got Manick behind McCormick. Misses the hook shot, but got it back. Wants it again. Wants it. Puts it up. Got it. That's what they want from him. Down on Manick, and here we go. Manick circling around. He slipped underneath. They go to Love. Love's going to be the one to take it. Puts up the shot. It's off. The game is over. And Kansas completes the biggest championship comeback.
This is nothing but that sports talk. This is Rafique with nothing but that sports talk. Yeah, literally, it's not just women's sports, it's men's sports. As you had South Carolina win the women's side of the March Madness tournament and Kansas taking the men's side. Welcome to the show, Adine Laase.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on everything that happened in what was another intense March Madness, starting with the women's side, like your impressions of the whole tournament run for South Carolina.
Yeah, so South Carolina has kind of been the favorite all year, I think. They had a couple upset losses that sort of made people maybe notice that they're kind of human like every other team. But I think in the tournament, they sort of solidified that they were like the favorite with a couple wins where maybe they didn't perform very well on offense, but their defense was so stellar that they were able to push through. And then in the Final Four with Brie Beal guarding Haley Van Lith, she really shut her down, and that was huge. And then of course Aaliyah Boston has been good all tournament, always getting double doubles, always rebounding on the offensive end. She was outstanding in that championship game. And then Destiny Henderson with her career high 26 points in the championship game, and she also did a really nice job guarding Paige Becker, so that was big.
Yeah, exactly. Because Uconn, they had like literally the most amount of losses in years, but yet they found their way into the championship round anyway. They ran into it with South Carolina, whose front court offense and defense has improved drastically since last year. I mean, you're talking about South Carolina team that's literally smoked Howard. And well, you see the tournament run. I don't need to tell you who they had to shut down. I mean, they never had like one close game throughout this entire tournament run.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Uconn was a really interesting opponent because they were down for a lot of the year based on injuries, but because of those injuries, they were able to get a lot of other players kind of in the mix, get them, ready to go. The Dorka Juhas injury really hurt them in that championship game because they needed a little more size, but it kind of happened to where they were hurt all year, struggling, losing more games than ever. Actually, I don't really think they're struggling, but by Uconn standards, they were. And then when you get them to the championship game, they're sort of back to where we expect to see them. So it was a really good matchup. And yeah, two just powerhouse programs. It was really awesome to see.
Yeah, you mentioned the type of upsets that we see this tournament. Like, what are some of the most craziest upsets that you've seen? Because obviously Creighton over Ohio is the biggest upset because we all expected Caitlin Clark to get to at least the Elite Eight and get shut down in South Carolina, or at least I had them going to the Elite Eight. And they ran into the buzzsaw in Creighton. As if the men's side win Creighton wasn't enough, the women's side was able to get as far as the Sweet 16. So you got to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, Creighton was awesome. I think they have a really, really interesting style of play. They do that motion offense. They're pretty much threes or layups. So kind of the analytical person loves that style. And they have a lot of scores. Their third leading scorer comes off the bench. So they're able to sort of put up a lot of numbers, create a lot of mismatches. And I think what they did on Caitlin Clark was really, really interesting in that they didn't just pick one, like their best defender, and say, okay, you've got to shut her down. They had a rotation of players on her. So everybody guarded her for like 3-minute stretches. So instead of defense having to adjust to Caitlin Clark, which is what usually happens, she had to adjust to whoever was guarding her. So whether it's someone more taller, stronger, more athletic, crafty, etc., no matter what it is, she's always having to be on her toes. So that was a huge upset. The other one I'd say that was a big upset was South Dakota, but they also were not like that shocking if you watched them this year, just because they had 3 fifth-year players leading the way. They're really disciplined. They played a tough schedule going into the tournament. So that was exciting to see kind of them show show what they could do in the tournament by beating Baylor.
Yeah, Baylor, I kind of expected better from them. Especially led by Laase Derouin. I mean, we probably knew they were going to regress a little bit. I mean, they lost Dee Richards. I mean, look, she got drafted to New York Liberty. Indiana Dejanay Carrington drafted to the Connecticut Sun. But this year, Baylor, they were still good enough to make it to the tournament, but they kind of And of course, Oregon, I expected them to get a deeper run, but they end up running to a buzzsaw as well. And that's the thing with March Madness tournaments. You're always going to run into these unexpected, but expected the basketball games and upsets. But the game of the tournament, in my opinion, will always be Uconn and NC State.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal game. Really, really tough to see for NC State. They had such a great season. I think that was Wes Moore's best coaching job he's done. But yeah, Uconn just kind of showed that they were able to get it done down the stretch. You know, they played good defense. They scored when they had to. And that's kind of what we expect from Uconn. That being said, I think it was such a great run for NC State to get back to that Elite Eight for the first time since the 80s.
Since 1998 to be exact.
Yep, 98. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that was really cool to see. It's one of those games where it's like, wow, I wish that this could have been a Final Four game instead of an Elite Eight game. But that's kind of the nature of the tournament. They presented a classic with UConn and NC State in that Elite Eight contest. And then, well, you know, UConn, they also took out Stanford, who won the championship last year. But then again, this is the first time that the women's side of UConn's ever lost in the championship round. So is it bad that UConn lost in the championship game? No, I think it's great for the women's basketball as a whole. You know, that's a complaint people make about the game, is that it's always UConn winning everything. But you have to look at women's basketball is 40 years younger than men's basketball. So this is kind of in the same position that men's basketball was in early on, when, you know, the same teams were winning there as well. So now we're sort of starting to see that parity rise and see more teams be able to compete, see players know that they don't just have to go to UConn, they don't just have to go to Stanford if they want to be successful. They can find the team that's the best fit for them and they can still have success. So that's something that's really exciting for the game. Obviously, you know, South Carolina isn't like a dark horse team that we've never seen win before, but it is nice to get some of those other teams like Creighton and South Dakota making deeper runs and then seeing someone that's not UConn cut down the nets.
Yeah, it really is. And Dawn Staley, she's an iconic coach in so many different levels, whether it's USA basketball or women's basketball. And I love the work that Dawn Staley does, even doing work for Just Women's Sports, which she's just so amazing as a coach at Raw. And being able to interview her when I covered the USA women's team, she's just so outspoken when talking about the progress that it takes for her teams to come together to become the juggernaut teams that you've seen for many years to come, or even if it's not every year, they're at least the juggernaut enough to get to the Final Four championship game. And this is not to mention, this is the first championship since 2017, which is like literally the same year where UConn finally lost a game. I mean, during the days of Breanna Stewart and up until that Final Four game in 2017, you almost thought they would never lose ever again. Now South Carolina, they managed to snag 2 championships after UConn's success kind of failed a little bit. I mean, this is the first championship since Angel Wilson was part of that South Carolina roster, being coached by Dawn Staley. She got coached by her in the USA. I mean, look at how far Angel Wilson has gone ever since that championship game. I mean, she managed to, she led her teams to like at least the semifinals, and she was in the WNBA finals in the WNBA wobble, or in this case, the bubble, but whatever you want to call it. But either way, statistically, Angel Wilson has found some huge success in the front court and mid-range. Do you see Aaliyah Boston replicate that same success next season?
I think that they're different players, but I do think that Aaliyah is going to have a lot of success her senior year at South Carolina, and then I think she'll have success in the WNBA as well. She's so strong. She's so gifted on the offensive rebounding end. I think the thing about Aaliyah Boston that I really like is she just kind of finds a way to get it done no matter what. You know, there was a play in the game against, I believe it was Uconn, but it was Louisville, where she was triple teamed. You know, she has all these little pesky guards on her. She's triple teamed and she still has the wherewithal to find Brie Bill under the basket for an easy layup. So her instincts are so good. She just finds a way to get it done and she never gets rattled. So I think, like, you know, her basketball skills are there, obviously, but then she's also got a lot of intangibles as well that'll help her.
Yeah, and that girl has a future, not just the rest of women's college basketball, but the WNBA when she makes it. But I also got to give a shout out to Henderson. I mean, she was making all the big plays on both ends of the floor and on the fast break. That deadly shooter, great fast break layups. It almost kind of reminds you of KFC a little bit. And I'm talking about Kalia Copper from Chicago Sky.
Yeah,
but anyways, it also kind of gives you that vibe. I mean, when you have a girl that can actually get the steal and score in the fast break, you're doing something right.
Yeah, I think Destiny Henderson's draft stock really went up this tournament. Her one thing is, she's pretty small. She's 5'6", but she showed that she could score inside against bigger people with contact. And she's a great shooter. I think there's always going to be places for shooters on teams. She ran that offense just beautifully. And, to be able to get your career high your senior year of the national championship game, that's a really special thing that not a lot of people can do. So she, regardless of what happens at the next level, she's kind of going to be, a historic part of March Madness forever, a historic part of South Carolina. That being said, I do think she has a really great chance to make an impact in the WNBA. Just the issue being, of course, there's always so much talent and there's not enough teams. But I think if things work out how they should for her, she'll have a good career.
Yeah, hopefully things go well. Well, now we can try to transition to the men's side. Well, what are your thoughts on the way that the men's side played out, from Kansas winning championship to St. Peter's Cinderella run to Duke losing in the Final Four in Coach K's final game of his career against North Carolina, to pretty much everything that you could think of that's unimaginable on the men's side of the bracket?
Yeah, St. Peter's was so fun. I think the crazy thing about St. Peter's, when you look at them on paper, there's no way that they should have been able to do what they did. A lot of those low seeds or high seeds that we see advance, when you look back at their statistics and what they've done on the year, you think, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But for them, it was just a true Cinderella for them to beat teams like Purdue. So that was fun. I think that's always such a great thing about the tournament, is like, here's this team that no one's ever heard of before. And then, 2 games into the tournament, suddenly they're everyone's favorite team. And I think that's so much fun, not only for the players, but just for the game in general. I think Coach K losing to North Carolina in the Final Four was just kind of a perfect summation of like just the poetic unjustness that is basketball. It would be perfect for him to go out as a national champion, but that's not really how the game works. That's not how life works, and it's a direct reflection of that. So I think, having North Carolina do it was almost perfect, as much as it sucks and as much as it's going to be weird not seeing him on the sidelines next year. North Carolina, what a great story they were this year. There was times in the season where people didn't think they'd even make the tournament. So to see them put it all together at the end, Hubert Davis' first year, you can't really ask for anything better. So that was great. And then in the end, Kansas, I think, was just too talented. They just had too many, great players. Brown was amazing. Cormac was amazing. So they all put it together, at the right time. And I think they were deserving of that win.
Exactly. And that's how it is when you run into these, when you're watching these March Madness. I mean, momentum is very scary in March Madness, whether it's the women's side or the men's side. It may look like you're going to have an almost perfect bracket, but you sometimes you tend to sleep on teams like St. Peter's. And I've been talking about these St. Peter's like the past 3 or 4 episodes. And if you watch my past 3 episodes of me and my guy, we go back and forth about them. Me being born and raised in New York City, Brooklyn, New York, which is literally right across the river from Jersey City, where the kids from St. Peter's play. Right? You can't even help but get obsessed with any team that's put together by New York, New Jersey, Connecticut ballers. If you grew up in New York City, you understand, or if you follow, or at the very least you follow the New York basketball culture, you know what it takes to put together a strong team in the most unexpected way possible.
And that's another really great thing about the tournament, teams like that. There's people like you who grew up there that could make these connections, and we all are able to make some kind of connection with the team and really buy in and just get excited about the sport, or about things that maybe we necessarily wouldn't all the time.
Well, exactly. But when you're watching that game with Kansas coming from behind to defeat North Carolina, like, what are your overall impressions about it? Even though you probably touch up a little bit of it, but just an elaboration on it. Because that was a classic, even more classic than Villanova hit a buzzer beater off North Carolina back in 2016.
I think the thing that made the difference in the end was Kansas finally decided that they were going to go at the basket. They were going to kind of assert their will. So once they started driving, once they started getting foul trouble, and then of course, North Carolina had some injuries, people that definitely weren't 100%. So that helps. But I think Kansas just sort of realized that, like, hey, we're the better team here. We got to get to work. So the way they attacked the basket and they defended in those last couple possessions was kind of what sealed it.
Exactly. And well, congratulations on Kansas and South Carolina for closing out March Madness with their championships. And I can't wait to see what goes on from here. Now, just get a little bit about your journalistic background. Like, what made you decide to get into journalism?
So I've always loved sports. When I was a kid, my family, we always watched, any kind of sporting event. My hometown is Grand Junction, Colorado, and they have the Junior College Baseball World Series. So that was kind of this first sporting event that I really fell in love with. I was like in second grade, and I would sit out in the sun and watch every game. So from there, I always knew I kind of wanted to do something with sports. Like most kids, when I was little, I was like, oh, I'm going to be in the WNBA. I'm going to play in college. I'm not a great athlete, but I do love basketball. So, and I ended up loving writing in high school. So I kind of figured should combine the two. So I went to Gonzaga University, covered the basketball teams there, men's and women's. And then after college, I did an internship at Sports Illustrated. And then I took a job covering hockey in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which was really cool. It was like a big adventure for me. And then I ended up starting my own high school sports website up there because they just love high school sports. That was a ton of fun. And then now I'm back in Colorado. I cover hockey for a paper out here. And then I also, of course, cover college basketball for Just Women's Sports. So that's kind of my long journey to where I am.
When you're doing all these stories, let's look back at the stories you've done for Gonzaga. I mean, Gonzaga had a rich history. I mean, they weren't able, as you saw, they weren't able to become national champions last year, or the previous year they were in the national championship. But when you was covering Gonzaga, like, what was some of the angles that you focus on when it comes to covering that team?
Yeah, so my senior year was the year that they lost to North Carolina in the national championship game. So that was with Nigel Williams-Goss and players like that. So for me at the time, I was writing for a student paper. So you kind of got to find different angles because people aren't going to seek out the student paper, to read. So we did a lot of behind the scenes things. We did some stuff on like the managers, which was really cool. But mostly, you're just kind of finding the personnel. And the great thing about being a student at a student paper is you get really good access. You see the players on campus and all that. So we could really get to know them and be able to kind of write, some in-depth stuff about them. That year was the first time that Gonzaga went to the Final Four. So that was a huge thing for not only just the students, the team, Mark Few, everybody. So we got to do a lot of cool pieces on like what was going on around campus, like how kids were feeling about it, and then also the team itself. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know it was a lot of fun being able to cover a team that had that history, years and years of making it to the tournament from when they collapsed against UCLA. Imagine covering that team with Adam Morrison back when they collapsed against UCLA. Probably would have had a different vibe covering that Gonzaga team and now you were doing it. You were in the arenas covering these March Madness games. Yeah,
when the Adam Morrison game, I think I was 8 or 9, so it's a long time ago for me, but I actually do remember it. I remember watching Adam Morrison. I remember the whole media created rivalry that he had with JJ Redick, and that was a lot of fun for me as a kid who just loved the game so much. I think the greatest thing about Gonzaga is that Mark Few has kind of done something that no one else has done, in that he was that Cinderella team. He decided, hey, I can make my Cinderella like a main state program, and he did, and he had so many opportunities to leave, and he never has, and he's built them up to be kind of a powerhouse. You still have to get that last step, which is a national title, but I think it's kind of only a matter of time.
Yeah, it's going to be a matter of time before Gonzaga actually go all the way. I mean, they had an undefeated season, and you saw how things worked out last year against Baylor. What was the first March Madness in the middle of the COVID era? Now, I want to touch upon like what was different for you doing journalism in the middle of the COVID era, especially with Just Women's Sports.
I think we kind of just realized like there's ways to cover games and stuff without being like on the ground. So there's a lot. You kind of have to be a little more creative, and you learn to be a better interviewer and a better journalist, because talking to somebody on the phone rather than, talking to them in person, it's harder to pick up on their expressions or how they're feeling or anything. So you really have to get creative, and you have to kind of push yourself to be a better journalist. And I think that helped me a lot. I know it's, in terms of the players and stuff, it's horrible. They never want to play like that. You want to be in front of your crowd. You want to be in front of, all the students, all the pauses and everything. I know it was really trying. And then for high school students, especially, when I was covering high school sports, getting their tournament canceled, your senior year, that's something you can never get back. And that just really is such a trying thing for them to have to go through.
Yeah, all the passion people put into covering sports, that passion goes away courtesy of the pandemic. And well, now you're doing stuff for Just Women's Sports. Like, why don't you talk about some of the different tasks you do for Just Women's Sports and what you love about the whole publication as a whole?
Yeah, I love, the reason I got interested in working for Just Women's Sports is because of pretty much everything that I wish I had had when I was a kid. I remember growing up and having a really, really hard time finding women's sports on TV. If you want to watch women's basketball, good luck. And it's still, it's still not as good as it should be, but we're seeing a lot of growth. So that's kind of what I wanted, just the idea to be able to help promote the women's game. And also I'm really passionate about women's sports. So of course, that's what I want to write about. So for them, I strictly cover, I can dabble in other stuff, but I'm essentially their women's college basketball writer right now. So now I'm doing all kinds of features. I'm doing, all the lists, rankings every week, that kind of thing.
Why don't you talk about some of the different teams that you cover for college basketball for Just Women's Sports?
Yeah, so South Carolina obviously is one of the coolest teams to cover, just because of, how great they've been all season. I wrote some features on some Stanford players, some on Kentucky. Kentucky was fun in the way they kind of ended the season. It was a shame that they went down in the first round of the tournament, but just their kind of run, they won like 11 games in a row. Ryan Howard is phenomenal. She's going to be a top WNBA pick. And I wrote a story on her, which was really fun to get to know her. But to see them kind of do that run at the end of the year was really great. Let's see what else. I wrote a big piece on the history of Indiana women's basketball, which was probably one of my favorite things I've gotten to write. Just kind of how, you always think of Indiana basketball as being like the pinnacle of the sport, but it's more the men's side, whereas now the women are kind of establishing themselves as a great program as well. So that was a team that I followed a lot, and it was cool to see kind of their journey. I think Terry Morin's a phenomenal coach. I think they're going to be kind of a program that we talk about for, the next 10 years.
Wow, I can kind of relate to that because I remember during my college days, I wasn't really covering too much women's basketball, but I was covering other women's sports too, like volleyball, field hockey, soccer, softball, or at least that's what I remember covering. And even if the story is like only a passable or above average, it's like some professors are in charge of that newspaper. They'll let you know whether or not you did a good job or if it needs a little bit of improvement. And this leads to this question. Have you ever had constructive criticism with your writing throughout your journalism career, even with Just Women's Sports?
Yeah, my editor at Just Women's Sports, Hannah Withiam, is phenomenal. She's probably the best editor I've ever had. She really pushes me. She makes sure kind of, my writing doesn't ever step on the story when I sort of try and get a little too flowery, get a little too creative. She constantly pushes me to be better. And I think I've never, sometimes I push back and she'll listen to me, and occasionally, I'm right and she'll let me make the change. But at the end of the day, every single edit she's made, every, thing that she's pushed me on to try and change, ends up bringing just a way better story in the end. And I'm so grateful to have her for that, because it takes a really special person to have that eye to be able to kind of edit someone's work, critique their work, but keep their voice in it. And she does a phenomenal job of that.
Yeah, I could tell. I mean, I've had professors that I usually critique my writing all the time. When I was writing for Simonaka paper covering a volleyball game. I mean, he always tells you the do's and don'ts. I mean, and then also that one piece I wrote going to Fordham University, I was told the two do's and don'ts. I mean, they actually sent you some edits just to show you that how your writing could improve. I've even had professors, they really break down what makes it better, what can turn a C+ into an A-. That's just how it is when you're doing writing for school newspapers or just with sports or any kind of publication for the matter.
Yeah, and I had that too in college. Gonzaga is not a huge school. It's not like a renowned journalism program, but for me, it was perfect. And I think it's a great underrated journalism program. Because if you want to write for the paper, you essentially can, because it's so small and you get a lot of like one-on-one, you get a lot of hands-on help from, your advisors, from the professors. So I had that as well, where I had a lot of help. My favorite professor's name was Tom Miller. He was great. And so he would sit down with me a lot. We'd go over my writing and he would tell me what he liked, tell me what he didn't like, tell me how I could improve. But he always did it, with a lot of kindness, which I appreciated as a young journalist.
Yeah, you're gonna get that a lot when you're doing journalism. And like, how many years out? How many years have you just graduated college?
I'm 27, so about 5 years now.
Oh, okay. Hey, it's good to know. I mean, obviously, you gain a lot of experience since then. We've all gained a lot of experience doing journalism on women's basketball. I mean, sadly, it's kind of tough to get reps nowadays. I mean, in order to get experience, you have to have opportunities. And you manage to get opportunities, these are just women's sports.
Yeah, I would say just, as a young journalist, you always just got to go for it. Send the email to somebody that you want to work with. That's what I did with Hannah, and that's how I got working with Just Women's Sports. Freelancing is huge. Never be afraid to pitch an article, especially if you're in college and you've got, all these players. Go down the roster and look at what town they're from. And if they have a little hometown paper, email that paper and see if they want a feature update on what that player is doing. So you create all kinds of contacts, you get practice, and I think that's the big thing.
Exactly. Now that we're done with the women's college basketball and men's college basketball, we're like literally days away from the WNBA draft. I want to get your what are your top 5 players in this year's WNBA draft that you expect to put up a good career?
Yeah, so I think the 1, 2, I'm not sure who's going to be 1, who's going to be 2 is going to be Nalissa Smith from Baylor, and then Ryan Howard from Kentucky. I think those 2 are going to be kind of the best 2 prospects. And then from there, it gets a little more interesting. I think Sabely from Oregon could be excellent. I like Emily Angsler a lot from Louisville. I think, her wingspan, her ability to get to the rim, her defense is really, really strong. So I think that's going to be really good as well. A player I'm interested to see how they do is Naz Hillman from Michigan. She is phenomenal. Just the way that, she could battle under the basket, constantly getting rebounds. But she's kind of undersized for a WNBA post, and she doesn't really extend her game. So I'm interested to see kind of how she develops going forward.
Yeah, and you know what? The Washington Mystics have the number 1 pick in this year's draft, and they kind of came short of making the postseason last year, and they lost. And they let Tina Charles walk in free agency. It's kind of sucked too, because they let her walk and she signed with the Phoenix Mercury. She never really had a chance to actually develop the Washington Mystics to the team that they were in 2019 when they won the WNBA championship. Now they're in the lottery with teams like the Los Angeles Sparks, the Atlanta Dream, and the Indiana Fever. Now, depending on who these teams, do you see any of those 4 teams making it back to the playoffs, or at the very least competing for a playoff spot after the WNBA draft?
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing about the WNBA is that it's so small that we saw that with the Liberty, right? They got just a couple different players and they were able to go from one of the worst teams to one of the top teams. So because there's not a lot of teams, all it takes is getting a couple players to come in and really shift the culture and change kind of the way you play. So I think that's a fun thing about it being so small, is that it's sort of wide open in that regard. Obviously I would love to see more teams. I can't wait till we get, some expansion. But yeah, I think it's kind of, I don't cover a lot of WNBA, so I'm not like the best person to ask about this, but I do think, you just get the 1, 2 great players in there and then they can shift things for you.
It's really nice. Well, at the very least, you're on top of which players you think should get progress in the WNBA.
Yeah.
Now, I know you mentioned you don't follow the WNBA, but
I follow it, but I don't cover it, so I'm not like as in depth.
But as a fan, what are some of the favorite what are your favorite WNBA teams, and what are some of your favorite moments from that team?
Yeah, I like to watch the Sky because I really loved Courtney Vandersloot in college at Gonzaga. So I like to follow that team. I think it was great seeing them win this year, seeing Candace Parker go back to her town and win with them. That was probably my favorite moment. I've loved seeing kind of the rise of the Aces, just with them, being a new team, just proving like how quickly you can build a squad, how well you can play with Asia Wilson. She's amazing. And then the Liberty, I love to see kind of the way they've sort of gone from one of the worst teams, like I said, to one of the top teams, and they did sort of everything right. They got players that other teams didn't want. They found a way to make them work. And then, of course, they have Sabrina Ionesco, so they had a top draft pick as well. But just to see the way they put things together was awesome.
Yeah, and funny thing with the New York Liberty, they are projected to draft that Emily Carson girl from NC State, and then I guess Nance Hillman will be a good pick. But if I'm the New York Liberty, I would probably go for like a front court. I mean, you don't really need too many scores. I mean, you have all the scoring you need with Sabrina Ionescu, Benigta Lady, Mikel Oniwede, who was your rookie of the year. And then you got Stephanie Dolson, who won a championship with Chicago Sky. Sandy Brandello, who's now your head coach, not Walt Hawkins. I mean, even though he did kind of improve a team from 2 wins to 12 wins, now it's just a matter of how much you're going to improve going forward, because you're going to be competing with a lot of teams. It's going to be intense. I mean, you got to deal with the Connecticut Sun. You got to deal with the Aces, even though they did lose Liz Cambage and she went to sign with the Los Angeles Sparks. By the way, it kind of sucks that they don't really get that much national television appearances with Liz Cambage on the team. They only get like one game.
Yeah, I mean that's another example of just how far we have to go as a country or as a world essentially promoting women's sports. There's no reason that those games shouldn't be on more, especially with that kind of star power. So that's something I would obviously like to see improve and change going forward.
Luckily, you got people like Aria and Christina trying to fight for women in sports publicity, because it's because of these girls why I got into covering it in the first place. Like, just go look back at my YouTube channel and watch my interviews with them, and you'll probably get an idea. Yeah. If I got to cover in the WNBA, even though I've been watching since 2006, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing I love about the women's sports space is, the people who cover it, the people who promote it are so passionate, and a lot of it is because they're people that didn't necessarily get the chance to get that kind of coverage when they were playing, or people like me who could never watch the games they wanted to watch because they just weren't on. And I think it's just such a passionate group. It's such a great time to get into women's sports if you're not already, just because we're seeing such growth right now. We're seeing so many amazing players, and it's like a historical period in the shift for the way people look at women's sports, the way they're promoted, and it's an exciting time to be writing about women's sports, to be a women's sports fan.
Exactly. And it's a exciting time to write about these type of stories, not just with the players on the court, but off court. Even, I mean, I don't talk about this enough, but we saw Brittany Griner. She's literally stuck in Russia for drug charges. Could be facing 10 years in prison, and it's going to be a difficult time because that could be a career ending for Brittany Griner. But let me ask this one question: do you ever see Brittany Griner playing a WNBA game after what she went through in Russia?
I mean, gosh, I just hope that she's okay, that she can, I think that's a really scary thing, a scary situation to be in. I think if everything works out and, she's able to, get home and be healthy, be mentally well, of course she can keep playing. She's a phenomenal player. She's kind of a once in a lifetime talent. So I just, my thoughts are with her and her family, and just hoping that everything goes well.
Yeah, this is a girl that I've been following since her days at Baylor. She was dominant then, like she's dominant right now, especially with the dunks. And all the disrespect you get from people when saying women can't dunk or women can't do this or we can't do that. Just watch the highlights. Watch the All-Star game highlights. I get people that tell me about the type of heat that women in sports get. Like don't tell me women can't dunk. Don't tell me that.
I mean, they can, but also if you only care about dunking, you clearly don't know a lot about basketball. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I feel about those people. So it's like, yeah, it's great that, there's women that can do that, but also there's so many other beautiful parts of the game that true basketball people understand.
Exactly. And well, now concludes episode Nothing But That Sports. So thank you so much for stopping by, Adine. And I love all the work you do for Just Women's Sports.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
And to all the ballers out there, get your head in the game.